The champagne glass slips from my fingers, crystal shattering against marble as I stare at the wedding announcement glowing on my phone screen. Marcus and Sarah, surrounded by autumn leaves, her hand displaying the ring I helped him pick out just 18 months ago. The same ring he promised would be mine someday. My name is Jessica Chen, and 3 years ago I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong. Real betrayal isn't discovering your boyfriend cheated. Real betrayal is watching your best friend walk down the aisle in the dress you designed together, marrying the man who whispered forever into your ear just months before. But here's what nobody tells you about betrayal. Sometimes it becomes the catalyst for discovering exactly who you're meant to be. I'm about to tell you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about revenge, justice, and the price of rebuilding your life from ashes. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why sometimes the most devastating losses become our greatest victories, and how 3 years of methodical planning can reshape not just your own destiny, but the lives of everyone who underestimated you. But first, let me take you back to where this all began. Because understanding my revenge requires understanding exactly how deep their deception ran. 2 years ago, I was living what I thought was my dream life in downtown Portland. Senior marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Creative, a corner office with views of the Willamette River, and a relationship with Marcus that felt like everything I'd ever wanted. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for 1, and I genuinely believed we were building something permanent. Sarah had been my closest friend since college, my maid of honor at my sister's wedding, the person I called when my father had his heart attack, the woman who held my hair back during food poisoning and celebrated every promotion with champagne. She knew my dreams, my fears, my passwords, and apparently my boyfriend's schedule better than I did. The signs were there, of course. They always are. Marcus working late more frequently, Sarah canceling our weekly coffee dates, mysterious text messages that made him smile in ways that used to be reserved for me. But when you trust someone completely, you explain away the inconsistencies. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, insecure, imagining problems where none exist. The discovery came on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd finished a client presentation early and decided to surprise Marcus with dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant. His apartment key felt familiar in my hand as I climbed the stairs to his third-floor unit, balancing takeout containers and planning the cozy evening ahead. The sound hit me first. Laughter, intimate and warm, drifting from his bedroom. Sarah's laughter, specifically, the kind reserved for private moments. My feet carried me forward despite my mind screaming warnings, because surely there was an explanation. Maybe they were planning something for my birthday. Maybe she was helping him pick out an engagement ring. Maybe the universe wasn't collapsing around me in his hallway. I pushed open the bedroom door to find them tangled in sheets that still smelled like my perfume from the weekend before. The takeout containers crashed to the floor, pad thai scattering across hardwood like confetti at the world's worst celebration. Marcus scrambled for his boxers while Sarah clutched a pillow against herself, her face cycling through shock, guilt, and something that looked disturbingly like relief. The explanations came in a torrent. It just happened. They never meant for it to go this far. They'd been fighting their feelings for months. They were going to tell me soon. They just needed to figure out how. The classic script of people who've been caught doing something unforgivable, trying to minimize the damage with words that mean nothing. What struck me most wasn't the betrayal itself, but the careful coordination of it. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. Sarah's overnight bag sat beside Marcus's dresser, her toothbrush next to his in the bathroom, her coffee mug in the kitchen sink. They'd been building a life together while I'd been building casts left with outals in the air. I screaming, without throwing things, without giving them the dramatic scene they probably expected. I simply walked out, got in my car, and drove to the Oregon coast. 3 hours of winding roads gave me time to process what I'd witnessed and begin calculating what came next. That night, sitting in a beachside motel room with the sound of waves crashing outside my window, I made 3 decisions that would define everything that followed. First, I would not beg, plead, or fight for someone who'd chosen to betray me so completely. Second, I would not allow their deception to destroy my career, my friendships, or my sense of self-worth. And third, I would make sure that their actions had consequences they never saw coming. But revenge, real revenge, isn't about destruction. It's about reconstruction. It's about becoming so undeniably successful, so genuinely happy, so completely transformed that your betrayers realize exactly what they lost when they chose deception over honesty. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead. I returned to Portland the next morning with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The apartment I'd shared with Marcus suddenly felt like a cocoon I'd outgrown. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every shared memory now served as evidence of my old life. The life where I'd been content to be small, accommodating, grateful for scraps of attention from people who saw me as supporting cast in their story. The breakup conversation lasted exactly 12 minutes. Marcus attempted the same explanations he'd tried the night before, with Sarah sitting silently beside him on the couch we'd picked out together. I listened without interrupting, taking mental notes about their body language, their coordinated talking points, the way they'd clearly rehearsed this scene. When he finished, I asked just one question. How long had this been happening? The answer, delivered with the kind of reluctant honesty that comes from knowing they'd been caught completely, was 8 months. 8 months of lies, 8 months of secret meetings, 8 months of them laughing at my obliviousness while I planned our future. Sarah finally spoke then, her voice small and apologetic. She hoped we could still be friends someday when enough time had passed. She'd always cared about me, she said. This wasn't about me not being good enough. Sometimes people just connect in unexpected ways. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw someone I'd never met before. The Sarah I'd known was loyal, honest, incapable of sustained deception. This woman sitting in my living room was a stranger wearing my best friend's face, speaking words designed to absolve herself of responsibility for the choice she'd made every single day for 8 months. My response was simple and final. I would be moved out by the end of the week. I didn't want their explanations, their guilt, or their friendship. What I wanted was for them to be happy together, because I genuinely hoped they'd found something worth destroying multiple relationships to obtain. The moving process took 3 days. I hired professionals to pack everything while I was at work, unable to bear the thought of sorting through the remnants of a life that had been built on lies. My sister helped me find a studio apartment in the Pearl District, small but bright, with enormous windows and exposed brick walls that felt like possibility rather than limitation. But moving apartments was just the beginning. The real transformation started when I realized that Marcus and Sarah hadn't just betrayed me personally, they'd underestimated me professionally. They'd seen me as someone who would fade quietly into the background, nurse my wounds privately, and eventually forgive them for the sake of maintaining social harmony. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they'd been. The Monday after I moved out, I requested a meeting with Patricia Morrison, the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Creative. Patricia was a legend in Portland's marketing world, a woman who'd built her agency from a one-person operation into the city's most respected creative firm. She was also notoriously difficult to impress and famously intolerant of drama in the workplace. I walked into her corner office with a portfolio of campaign ideas I'd been developing in my spare time. Concepts too ambitious and innovative for my current role, but to think bigger. Patricia listened perfect for someone readied as I presented 3 fully developed marketing strategies for potential clients we'd been courting unsuccessfully for months. The first was a complete brand overhaul for Pacific Northwest tourism, incorporating virtual reality experiences and social media integration that would put travelers directly into Oregon's most beautiful locations before they even booked their trips. The second was a sustainability campaign for Cascade Brewing that would transform their environmental initiatives into a competitive advantage. The third was a digital transformation plan for Morrison's Books that would help them compete with online retailers while maintaining their community bookstore identity. Patricia asked pointed questions about budget requirements, timeline expectations, and measurable outcomes. I had answers for everything because I'd spent the last 3 sleepless nights preparing for this conversation with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that comes from having nothing left to lose. At the end of the presentation, Patricia leaned back in her leather chair and studied me with the intensity that had intimidated me for years. "Jessica," she said finally, "these ideas are exactly what this agency needs to stay competitive. The question is whether you're ready to execute them at the level they deserve. That conversation changed everything. Patricia offered me a promotion to Senior Campaign Director, a position that had never existed before but would be created specifically to implement the strategies I'd presented. The salary increase was substantial, but more importantly, I would have creative control over the agency's most ambitious projects and of junior designers, a team reporting directly to me. I accepted immediately, knowing that this opportunity represented more than professional advancement. This was my chance to prove that the woman Marcus and Sarah had betrayed was just a shadow of who I was becoming. The new role transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working 18-hour days became routine, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Every successful campaign, every impressed client, every team meeting where junior designers looked to me for guidance built something inside me that Marcus and Sarah had unknowingly shattered. Confidence, but deeper than that. Purpose? Within 6 months, my campaigns had generated $12 million in new revenue for Pinnacle Creative. The Pacific Northwest Tourism Project won 3 industry awards and was featured in Marketing Week as an example of innovative regional branding. Cascade Brewing's sustainability campaign increased their market share by 43% and landed them partnerships with major grocery chains across the West Coast. But the real victory was Morrison's Books. Patricia's family had owned that bookstore for 37 years, and watching Amazon slowly strangle independent retailers had been breaking her heart. The digital transformation plan I developed didn't just save the business. It turned Morrison's into a destination, combining online ordering with in-store experiences that made reading feel communal again. Author events streamed live to customers' homes, book clubs that met virtually and in person, a subscription service that delivered personalized reading recommendations based on detailed customer profiles. The bookstore's revenue doubled in 8 months. Patricia cried when she saw the quarterly numbers, not because of the money, but because we'd proven that small businesses could innovate their way out of extinction. My personal life underwent its own revolution. The studio apartment that had felt like exile gradually became my sanctuary. I filled it with art from local galleries, books I'd always meant to read, and plants that required the kind of daily attention I'd previously reserved for other people's needs. Saturday mornings meant farmers' market visits and cooking elaborate brunches for one. Sunday evenings were for planning the upcoming week's campaigns and sketching ideas for projects that didn't exist yet. The loneliness I'd expected never materialized. Instead, I discovered the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone was choosing to spend Friday night refining a presentation because the work excited me. Alone was traveling to Seattle for a client meeting and extending the trip into a weekend exploring the city's museums. Alone was having complete control over my time, my space, and my decisions. I joined a rock climbing gym and discovered muscles I didn't know I had, signed up for Italian lessons, and found myself dreaming in a language I was still learning. Started a photography hobby that began with documenting my campaigns and evolved into weekend trips throughout Oregon, capturing landscapes that reminded me how beautiful the world could be when you stopped looking at it through someone else's eyes. The transformation wasn't just professional or personal, it was spiritual, though I wouldn't have used that word at the time. Every challenge I conquered, every goal I achieved, every moment I chose growth over comfort rebuilt something fundamental about how I saw myself. The woman who'd needed Marcus's validation to feel worthy was disappearing, replaced by someone who created her own worth through action and achievement. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sarah's relationship played out exactly as I'd predicted. The excitement of forbidden love couldn't sustain the reality of building a life together. Social media provided glimpses into their struggles. Arguments disguised as playful banter, separate vacations explained as needing space to pursue individual interests. The gradual disappearance of couple photos from their feeds. I watched their decline with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment, not with malice, but with curiosity about whether people who built relationships on deception could ever trust each other completely. The answer, apparently, was no. Sarah tried to reconnect several times during that first year. Casual text messages about missing our friendship, invitations to coffee that came with promises of explanation and apology. I responded politely but distantly, the way you might acknowledge a former coworker you barely remembered. Her friendship had been valuable when I thought it was genuine. Once I understood it was conditional, it lost all appeal. Marcus made no such overtures, which I respected more than Sarah's manufactured guilt. He'd chosen what he wanted and committed to that choice. The fact that his choice was destroying him was unfortunate, but not my responsibility to fix. The Real Test's annual marketing of my transformation came during Portland Excellence Awards. Pinnacle Creative had been nominated in 4 categories, with my campaigns accounting for 3 of those nominations. The ceremony was held at the Nines Hotel, Portland's most prestigious venue, with every major agency in the city in attendance. I wore a midnight blue dress that had cost more than my rent in the old apartment, styled my hair in a way that made me feel powerful rather than pretty, and arrived alone by choice rather than circumstance. The woman who'd once felt incomplete without someone beside her. At social events now preferred the freedom of moving through the room at her own pace, engaging in conversations that interested her rather than supporting someone else's networking goals. The evening was a triumph. Morrison's books won Best Digital Innovation Campaign. Pacific Northwest Tourism took home the Regional Marketing Excellence Award. Cascade Brewing's sustainability project earned the Environmental Impact designation. Patricia accepted the awards on the agency's behalf, but made sure to mention my leadership role in each campaign. During the reception afterward, I was approached by representatives from 3 competing agencies, 2 potential clients who'd seen my work, and a journalist from Portland Business Journal who wanted to interview me about the future of regional marketing. Each conversation reinforced what I'd begun to suspect. The year of focused work and intentional growth had transformed me into someone who commanded respect in professional circles. That's when I saw them, Marcus and Sarah, standing near like they'd rather the bar, looking be anywhere else. She wore a dress I recognized from our shopping trips together, back when we'd shared everything. He wore the suit I'd helped him pick for job interviews, back when his success had felt like our success. They looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. Sarah's smile seemed forced as she spoke to someone I didn't recognize. Marcus kept checking his phone, the universal signal of someone who wanted an excuse to leave. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. They'd destroyed something real in pursuit of something exciting, and the exciting thing had proved as fragile as most exciting things do. But pity wasn't the emotion that stayed with me as I watched them navigate the room with obvious discomfort. What stayed with me was gratitude. Their betrayal had forced me to confront a version of myself I'd outgrown without realizing it. The Jessica who'd needed their approval, who'd made herself smaller to accommodate their comfort, who'd measured her worth by their attention. That woman had been holding me back from becoming who I was meant to be. I approached them because ignoring them would have suggested they still had power over my emotions. Better to demonstrate that they were simply 2 people I used to know, no more significant than any other acquaintances from my past. The conversation lasted perhaps 3 minutes. Congratulations on my success, acknowledgement of their presence, polite inquiry about their work, their lives, their apparent happiness. Sarah mentioned they'd gotten engaged, her voice carrying the kind of forced enthusiasm that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I offered genuine congratulations and meant them. Whatever they'd found together had cost them both considerably. But if it made them happy, that seemed like justice of a sort. Not the justice I'd once craved, which involved their suffering, but a more mature justice that recognized happiness earned through destruction rarely lasted. The conversation ended naturally, without drama or revelation. They returned to their corner of the room, I returned to mine, and life continued exactly as it had before our brief interaction. Except now I knew something I hadn't known before. I was completely, absolutely, genuinely over them. The real revenge wasn't that they'd become smaller while I'd become larger, though that had certainly happened. The real revenge wasn't that my career had flourished while theirs had stagnated, though that was also true. The real revenge was that I'd stopped needing revenge at all. But the story doesn't end there, because success has its own momentum. And the woman I'd become wasn't content with just rebuilding her life. She was ready to build something entirely new. The Monday morning after the awards ceremony, I walked into Patricia's office with a proposal that would either cement my reputation or end my career. I'd spent the weekend crafting a business plan that represented everything I'd learned about risk, reward, and the power of betting on yourself when no one else will. I wanted to start my own agency, not as competition to Pinnacle Creative, but as a specialized consultancy focused on what I'd discovered was my true gift: helping businesses that had been written off, overlooked, or underestimated find their voice and wreck position. Companies lame their market like Morrison's Books, organizations with heart and history, but lacking the vision to translate those qualities into contemporary success. Patricia listened without interruption as I outlined my vision for Chen Strategic, a boutique firm that would take on 6 clients maximum per year, dedicating months to each transformation rather than churning out quick campaigns. I had enough savings from my promotion to sustain myself for 18 months, enough industry connections to generate referrals, and enough confidence to believe I could build something remarkable from nothing. Her response surprised me. Rather than seeing my departure as betrayal, Patricia offered to become my first investor and ongoing mentor. She'd watched me transform not just myself, but her entire agency's approach to client relationships. The success I'd achieved in 12 months typically took senior directors 3 years to accomplish. More importantly, she understood something about my motivation that I was still learning to articulate. This wasn't just about professional ambition. This was about proving that the woman Marcus and Sarah had discarded was capable of building something they could never have imagined. The next 6 months became a masterclass in controlled chaos, securing office space in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, interviewing and hiring 3 exceptional junior strategists, developing proprietary methodologies for client assessment and campaign development, and most challenging of all, learning to trust my instincts when every decision felt like stepping off a cliff. My first client was a family-owned restaurant chain called Bellanotte that had been struggling against corporate competitors for 5 years. The Rossini family had operated their 3 locations for 2 generations, but their traditional approach to marketing was slowly bleeding customers to restaurants with bigger advertising budgets and more aggressive social media presence. I spent 2 weeks working in their kitchens, serving customers, understanding their operations from the inside. What I discovered was a story that their previous marketing firm had completely missed. Bellanotte wasn't just another Italian restaurant. It was a gathering place for Portland's immigrant communities, a location where first-generation Americans brought their children to experience authentic cuisine while second-generation families maintained connections to their heritage. The campaign I developed positioned Bellanotte as Portland's living room, a place where cultures intersected and stories were shared over food. We created documentary-style content featuring 3 generations of families explaining of community. We Restaurant meant to their sense what the partnered with local cultural organizations to host events that celebrated Portland's diversity while showcasing Bellanotte's role in fostering connection. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Revenue increased by 67% in 4 months. 2 additional locations opened within the year. The Rossini family was featured on the Food Network as an example of how traditional restaurants could thrive by embracing their authentic community role rather than competing on convenience alone. But the real validation Portland Business Journal name came when Chen Strategic as one of the city's fastest-growing consultancies and featured my story as their cover article. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Business Empire, How One Woman Turned Personal Devastation into Professional Triumph." The article detailed my journey from discovery of Marcus and Sarah's affair to building a 7-figure consultancy in 18 months. It quoted clients describing my approach as revolutionary, colleagues praising my innovative methodologies, and competitors acknowledging my impact on Portland's marketing landscape. Most satisfying was the sidebar comparing Chen Strategic's client retention rate to industry standards. Where most agencies lost 30% of their clients annually, I'd maintained every client I'd ever signed. The secret, according to the journalist who'd interviewed dozens of my business contacts, was that I treated each client relationship like a marriage. Total commitment, absolute honesty, and the understanding that success required both parties to grow together. The article was published on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I'd received 17 new client inquiries, 3 speaking engagement requests, and an invitation to join the Portland Chamber of Commerce's board of directors. My phone rang constantly with congratulations from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Sarah called that evening, Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, lacking the confident warmth I remembered from our friendship. She'd seen the article, she said. She wanted to congratulate me on my success. She hoped I was happy. She wondered if we could meet for coffee sometime, not to rehash the past, but to celebrate how far I'd come. I listened without interrupting, the way I'd learned to do with clients who needed to process difficult truths. When she finished, I thanked her for calling and declined the coffee invitation. Not from anger or resentment, but from genuine disinterest. The woman she'd betrayed no longer existed, and the woman I'd become had no need for connections built on guilt and nostalgia. Marcus sent a text message 3 days later. Just 2 words. Well done. I didn't respond, but I appreciated his brevity. Unlike Sarah's elaborate attempt at reconciliation, his acknowledgement felt honest. He'd recognized that I'd surpassed whatever version of myself he'd known, and he was offering the only tribute that mattered: respect from a distance. The real moment of triumph came 6 weeks after the article was published. I was reviewing proposals for Chen Strategic's expansion into Seattle when my assistant knocked on my office door. There was someone here to see me, she said. Someone who claimed to be an old friend but wouldn't give her name. Sarah stood in my reception area, wearing the kind of expensive outfit that suggested she was doing well professionally, but looked uncomfortable in her own skin. Her engagement ring caught the afternoon light streaming through my office windows, the diamond substantial but somehow desperate, like she was trying to convince herself of something she didn't quite believe. She'd come to offer me a job. The marketing firm where she worked as a senior account manager had been following my success with Chen Strategic. They wanted to hire me as their creative director, she explained, with a salary significantly higher than what I was probably earning as an independent consultant. She'd recommended me for the position despite our history, she said, because she believed in my talent. I invited her into my office and listened as she outlined the opportunity with practiced enthusiasm. The firm handled major national accounts, she explained. I'd have resources at Chen Strategic could never match. A team of 20 creatives reporting to me. And the stability that came from working with established corporate clients rather than gambling on small businesses. When she finished her presentation, I walked to the windows overlooking the city skyline and considered how to respond. 3 years ago, this conversation would have felt like validation. Sarah acknowledging my professional worth, offering me a pathway to greater success, treating me as an equal rather than someone who needed her protection. Now it felt like something else entirely. Desperation. I turned back to face her and asked the question that had been forming since she'd started talking. Why are you really here? The facade cracked immediately. Her carefully composed expression faltered, and for the first time since she'd entered my office, I saw something genuine in her face. Fear. The truth came out in fragments, the way truth always does when people have been avoiding it for too engagement long. Her Marcus was to struggling. He'd become distant, critical, comparing their relationship unfavorably to what he'd had with me. He talked about my success constantly, she said, as evidence of opportunities he'd missed by choosing her. Her own career had stagnated. The promotion she'd expected never materialized. Colleagues who'd once respected her work now questioned her judgment. The affair that had seemed like the beginning of something wonderful had become the foundation for a relationship built on mutual resentment and regret. She needed me to succeed at her company, she admitted finally, because my presence might prove to Marcus that she could still attract exceptional people, that she was still worth choosing. I sat down across from her and studied the woman who'd once been my closest friend. 3 years of living with the consequences of her choices had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. The confidence that had made her attractive to Marcus in the first place had been replaced by a desperate need for external validation. My response was gentle but absolute. I thanked her for thinking of me, but explained that Chen Strategic represented more than a career move. It was proof that I could build something meaningful from nothing, that I could create value rather than just managing it for others. More importantly, I'd learned something about success that she apparently hadn't. Real achievement wasn't about climbing someone else's ladder. It was about building your own structure, setting your own standards, and measuring victory by your own definitions rather than society's expectations. She left my office looking smaller than when she'd arrived, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Compassion. Not the kind that leads to reconciliation, but the kind that recognizes another person's suffering without feeling obligated to fix it. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the proposals for Chen Strategic's Seattle expansion. My business had grown beyond what I'd imagined possible when I'd first pitched Patricia on the idea of independence. 6 employees, 12 active clients, a waiting list of companies wanting to work with us, and revenue projections that suggested I'd be able to open offices in 3 additional cities within 2 years. But the numbers weren't what made me smile as I looked out at Portland's skyline. What made me smile was the realization that I'd built something that belonged entirely to me. Every decision, every success, every failure was mine to own. The woman who'd once measured her worth by Marcus's attention now measured it by her ability to transform struggling businesses into thriving enterprises. The revenge I'd originally craved had evolved into something more sophisticated and ultimately more satisfying. I hadn't destroyed Marcus and Sarah's lives. I'd simply built a life so compelling that their choices seemed insignificant by comparison. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, asking if I wanted to grab dinner and discuss a potential partnership opportunity. As I gathered my things to meet her, I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked powerful in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. She looked like someone who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't getting even with people who'd wronged you. It was becoming someone they could never have imagined, someone who'd turned their betrayal into the foundation for a life they'd never be capable of building themselves. But even that wasn't the end of my story, because success has a way of revealing opportunities that were always there, waiting for someone brave enough to seize them. And I was just getting started. The Seattle expansion launched 8 months later in a converted loft space overlooking Elliott Bay. I hired Maria Gonzalez as the regional director, a former Nike marketing executive who'd grown tired of corporate politics and wanted to work with companies that had stories worth telling. Together, we developed a client acquisition strategy that felt more like matchmaking than sales. Our first Seattle client was a struggling bookbinding company called Heritage Press, owned by a 70-year-old craftsman named Robert Kim, who'd spent 40 years creating custom books for authors, artists, and collectors. Amazon's dominance in publishing had nearly killed his business, but Robert refused to compromise on quality even as orders dwindled to almost nothing. I spent 3 days in his workshop, watching him transform raw materials into objects of beauty with techniques that machines couldn't replicate. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, each cut deliberate, each fold perfect. What struck me most was his relationship with his materials. He spoke about paper grain and leather quality the way sommeliers discuss wine vintages. The campaign we developed positioned Heritage Press as Seattle's last master craftsman, documenting Robert's process through slow-motion cinematography that turned bookbinding into performance art. We partnered with local authors to create limited edition volumes of their work, with Robert explaining his techniques in accompanying documentaries. Each book came with a certificate of authenticity and a story about the man who'd created it. The transformation was remarkable. Orders increased by 400% within 6 months. Robert hired 2 apprentices to handle demand while maintaining his exacting standards. The Seattle Times featured him as a living treasure, prompting inquiries from collectors across the country. Most importantly, Robert smiled again when he talked about his work. Success bred success. Word of mouth brought us Pacific Northwest Coffee Collective, a struggling cooperative of small roasters competing against corporate chains. We repositioned them as guardians of coffee culture, creating experiences that educated consumers about the difference between commodity coffee and artisanal craftsmanship. Revenue doubled in 8 months. Then came Emerald City Bikes, a family-owned shop being crushed by online retailers and big-box stores. We transformed them into Seattle's cycling community hub, hosting events that celebrated bike culture while showcasing their expertise in custom builds and repairs. They went from near bankruptcy to opening 2 additional locations within a year. So here's what I learned about revenge through 3 years of rebuilding my life from nothing. The sweetest victory isn't watching your betrayers suffer, It's watching them realize they discarded someone who was just getting started. Marcus and Sarah thought they were trading up, but they were actually trading away someone who would go on to build an empire they could never touch. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and absolutely impossible to get back. If someone has betrayed your trust, don't waste time plotting their downfall. Plot your comeback instead.